This is Access Ann Arbor.
Hello, I'm Marsha Chamberlain, and I am a member of the Ann Arbor Public Art Commission, and I'm here with 4 members of the Ann Arbor school system to talk about a subject near and dear to our hearts. That's Coleman Jewett. My job is to tell you, as an introduction, a bit about the Coleman Jewett Memorial, which is a project of the Public Art Commission to honor this man who taught in the school system, played basketball at the Y, bought his numbers at the Washtenaw Dairy, and was a mentor to hundreds of students in our community. And he sold his Adirondack chairs and other artwork at the Ann Arbor Farmers Market for 40+ years. So we thought it was an ideal thing to honor this citizen of our community with a memorial that would be his 2 Adirondack chairs done in bronze and set where people could do what he did every Saturday, which is to be at the farmer's market, sit and have a cup of coffee, and talk to somebody sitting in the chair next to you. So that's the form that the memorial will take. We're in the fundraising process for this, and we'll talk a bit about that later on. But I'm going to ask the guests to introduce themselves. So Sarah, tell us who you are and what you do.
Well, I'm Sarah Ashback, and I'm a retiree of Ann Arbor Public Schools and worked with Coleman at Tappan for many years. And I'm currently filling in actually it's his old position at Tappan as an interim assistant principal at Tappan.
So the spirit of Coleman is in the office there.
Yes,
huh?
it is. Yep.
And the tall one in the back, Fred.
My name is Fred Smith. I'm the instrumental music director for bands at Tappan Middle School. I've been there about 26 years. I've been teaching in Ann Arbor now for about 31. And I knew Coleman more by way of others than directly. But I also met him many times at Washtenaw Dairy and had conversations with him. So he had an effect on me as well.
Wendy.
I'm Wendy Raymond, and I teach at Tappan still, and I started there in 1985, and Coleman was working there as a principal then, and I feel so fortunate to have had those years with him. So.
Hi, Ann Arbor Public Community. My name is Linda Carter, and I'm enjoying my 40th year in public education, all 40 years in Ann Arbor. I had a wonderful opportunity to come to Tappan. Would have been in 1986. I'd been at Forsyth 12 years prior to that, and had a wonderful time spending 1 year with Coleman Jewett, who then went to Forsyth, where I just left. And so learned a lot. Just a terrific assistant principal. Always put kids first.
So there are lots of stories about Coleman that, as I've worked on this project, I've heard from folks like you, from students and so forth. And so as we started putting the campaign together to raise money, we had this sign which is in front of us which says, "Remember this man?" And of course lots and lots of people do from the various roles in the community. But I'm impressed with how he's remembered. I mean, most people after they've left a job 24 years later are not remembered as often. And so tell me some stories about why he's remembered. What did he have that was special or unique?
Well, one thing that I think he will always be remembered for is blow pops. And
Absolutely.
I have to bring some of those.
he thought blow pops were the most wonderful candy invention. You get a sucker, you get bubble gum, and his office, you could always get a blow pop in his office, and that was his way of giving kudos to any student. And I've run into people all over Ann Arbor who had Coleman at some time as their principal, and they don't ever forget that he gave them a blow pop.
Yeah.
So
He gave them to kids and adults.
yeah.
And he, even if he had to speak to a student very sternly, or there'd been a problem, the last thing that would happen would be the blow pop. And he had a real magical way of diffusing tension anywhere he went. His sense of humor was delightful and not at all sarcastic, but always hilarious. But just somehow, I don't know, just was a presence that affected everyone around him, and kids and teachers and everybody. He was special.
Somebody was telling me that he was good at puns, and what was the P's?
Yeah, he loved puns. And he also loved sharing his wonderful artistic talent with the school. He had signs and posters all over the place. But the pun, oddly, that I remember was up in the cafeteria. There was a sign that he made that said, "Give peas, P-E-A-S, a chance." Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. It was
Well, Linda,
perfect for middle school.
You have some stories about his drawings and so forth.
Absolutely. Coleman Jewett served on the bargaining team for many years. Matter of fact, the file folder of the drawings, he was on the team from 1971 until 1982. And so he kept the humor going, because sometimes negotiations would be a little bit difficult at best. But he would draw pictures of the various team members and put mustaches and beards and funny hats and one-liners, but kept things upbeat. And that was really good for both teams, quite frankly. And he always wanted to make sure everybody knew, I believe in unions. We do the right thing for our teachers, because what we do in regards to contract negotiations for teachers, they will have a better opportunity to teach our children. So he was really good about that. And I think about those Saturdays where I'd come to the farmers market. This is my 27th year, either as the president of the AAEA or vice president. But he would always stop me. We'd talk and say, "Carter, have a seat. What's going on with the union?" And we would talk, and then he'd give me some advice. Now, the other side's going to try this, so you need to react this way. And so he always gave me good counters. And it was always really it was helpful, but it was also fun.
Yeah. And it's a nice place to do it, sitting there at the market instead of in the lunchroom at school or whatever, or across the desk. Or
I think that's part of the reason that his legacy is so strong with all of us that worked with him all those years ago, is that we were able to still see him so often at the market or at Washtenaw Dairy, and he was always so interested in what was happening with us, with our families, and just so personal and supportive. The artwork he used to make, he would pop into your classroom with a award that he made. You have the most plants, or the best decorated classroom, or and there was a teacher who was a new teacher at Tappan and was struggling as like a 23-year-old fresh out of college, and struggling with her kids, and went in and talked to him, and he came back. He just came and sat in the back room and started drawing caricatures of the kids. And so he would hold up a caricature of one kid, and the kids would laugh, haha, and they'd draw me, and so he would draw them, and he came in there every day until things settled down and that teacher got her bearings. It was just such a supportive way and such a lighthearted, upbeat, like you said, way of dealing with a tense and could have been problematic situation for that teacher. It just really helped her out.
One of the people who spoke on Sunday at the farmers market was Andrew O'Neill, who attended Tappan. And I introduced him by saying, I don't think he ever got expelled from Tappan. And Andrew went on to explain that, he was a kid with a kind of a sense of humor and a kind of edge to him and so forth, and that Coleman kept him on the straight and narrow in some ways. But he made the point that those middle school years that you all work with are some of the most difficult, and that Coleman made middle school really a pleasure for a lot of the kids. And I'm guessing the sense of humor is one good example of that. But he also interacted with you, his fellow teachers, in unique ways.
Yeah, he paid attention to everyone. I mean, he really had such a big heart and was such so good at building relationships. He just understood people and really cared about people and knew about their families. And he he brought people together too. Back in those days when he was there, we had potlucks like every month, and the teachers would hang out together. We ate lunch together. The lunch table, as I was mentioning earlier, was really a pleasure because we'd all come running down. Teachers now eat alone in their rooms and in a big hurry and inhaling sandwiches. But back then, we used to grab our lunches and run down to the cafeteria and sit at a big table. And he had a sign up that said "No school talk," and it was like a no smoking sign. And then he would say, "Okay, the topic of the day is," and we would proceed to talk about whatever topic he brought, and we would laugh, and there would be 20 people sitting around the table, like a big family. It was great.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, Fred, you're the one who never really worked directly with Coleman. You saw him at the dairy and stuff.
That's correct.
But there's a legacy that you
Well, I have
know
two
of.
very close friends, one a colleague, and that's Sandy McConaughey, who I taught with. We were the longest probably running co-teacher team here in Ann Arbor for 24 years. And she worked with Coleman. One of her fond memories, and I talked to her about this, was that she had a sign up that she put at the top of her office. And I said, well, where did that sign come from? And it was a drawing. It was one that I thought a kid had done and done a good job with, and from the art department. And she said, that's Coleman. And I said, really? She said, yes. And when he gave me that sign, I knew I had made it.
So now, was this a self-portrait or just a sign he had made?
It was her name, and her name was quite unique.
Yes.
And it was long, and and the way he made it, it ended up going from a very large McConaughey. And it was very artful, and she just knew that when he did that, it was great.
Yeah.
One of the things she remembered was when he came in and worked with the jazz band. He was really a music aficionado. He knew his music. He knew jazz. Probably one of the reasons one his children is the radio host over at EMU doing jazz.
Michael Jewett.
Michael. But he would come in there, and I think he even was James Brown one year.
Oh, yes, he was. Oh, that's right.
And he actually did the act with the jazz band and sang James Brown's, which one was it? Do you remember?
I feel good.
I Feel Good. That's what it was.
Well, along that line, I do have to say I was talking to Coleman's wife, and she was telling me the story about he often was called upon to host events in the school and in the school district. And he was going to host a retirement dinner for a superintendent who will remain nameless. But
A long time ago.
it was a long
In
time
the
ago.
20th century.
And he showed up and he sat down next to the gentleman who he was going to be hosting this dinner for, and he went unrecognized. And it was because he had dressed himself up as Mrs. Doubtfire in full costume.
That's so bold.
And I guess left everybody somewhat speechless. But I have to go back to the farmers market stuff, because I would love to know how many thousands of chairs he sold over time. Who knows? He didn't keep real great records on that, I understand. But in preparation for the event we had last Sunday, where we were inviting the donors to the project and the public to come and learn more, we passed out flyers at the farmers market for several weeks. And one day I gave this guy a flyer, and he looked at it and he said, oh, he was the assistant principal at Tappan. And this was a guy who, is in his 30s. He lives in New York. He just happened to be in town for the weekend. And we stood there for probably 15 minutes while he told me stories about Coleman and how much he meant to him as, a probably 14-year-old boy struggling to find himself in middle school. And those are the kind of stories I've heard over and over and over again.
Those chairs are really special, and he was very generous with those chairs too. When somebody had a tough time, you might all of a sudden have a chair or two. When I have twins, and when they were born, he gave me a little tiny bench for them to sit on, and that's a keepsake, of course. And I think many of us have stuff in our classrooms that not just like the beautiful masks that he made, but also I have a little plant stand. I have a podium. I mean, there's different things that he made, but he was very generous with his craft as well. He knew that was meaningful to people, and you know, those things are real treasures now for sure.
Oh yeah, I emailed a friend of mine who had. I had bought one of Coleman's chairs for her to paint as a gift for my husband. And she had very carefully painted river rocks and fish. It sort of had a trout fishing theme. And then when we moved and could no longer fit the chair in our house, I gave it to her to take to her cottage. And so I emailed her and said, can you send me a picture of that chair so we can put it up on the Facebook page? And she said, oh, I'm so sorry, I can't get more chairs. She said, I have 5 of them at the cottage, but you know, I've had them for a while and they're kind of wearing out. But I think one of the reasons that this memorial structured the way it is has been important is because sitting in those chairs and having conversations with Coleman is what hundreds and hundreds of people did over the years that he was at the market. And it's the way they remember him is he always had the chairs he was selling, but there was one that he sat in and there was another one, and it was rarely empty. People would just trade out, whether it was a former student or somebody wanting to buy a chair or whatever it was. And there's a really wonderful community building that he did by virtue of that and by the things you all are talking about, mementos you have in your classroom and signs that he made and that sort of thing. And so this isn't going to be the traditional man on horseback kind of thing, or you know, a bust of Coleman Jewett. It will evoke Coleman, the spirit of it, and I think this piece behind me, which was done by Susan Major, and you know, it's an old storm window and it's painted from the reverse side. And I'd like to see this be part of the plaque that really tells the story of why we chose these chairs and so forth. And so the hope is that it will really be a kind of lasting tribute to carry on this community conversation. And wouldn't you love to have had a microphone somewhere where you could have recorded some of those those conversations and stories?
Well, one thing I know that if you were recording it, when I was the one sitting in that other Adirondack chair with him, the entire time he'd be like, "Hi, Mike. Hi, Mary." Like he knew every other person who would walk by, and he wouldn't fail to come up with their name and greet them. Like his reach was so far.
And even while you're sitting in the chair and he's doing that, you know that he's totally connected and listening to you.
Definitely.
I mean, it's just the biggest heart.
Yeah, it's the perfect tribute for him. And that was what I would say about while he was being a principal. He would take plenty of time to talk to kids. You know, he would never rush them out of his office. He would get to the bottom of how they were feeling and what was going on. It was really important to him.
It's a rare gift.
It is. It is.
Yeah. And that middle school humor, it was always appropriate.
What's middle school humor?
Yeah, he was, well, it's rare. People that, and I've taught all 3 levels. Middle school teachers are anointed. We have this, you know, that staying power, and he was just always so appropriate with his humor. And even if the discipline had to come along, he still sent the kid. I remember a kid coming to my orchestra class late. She had gotten in trouble, and so he wrote her a pass. And she says, "Thank you for the blow pop." And he says, "Not in Miss Carter's orchestra. You have that later. You have to play your violin." And so she actually said that. She said, "I got a blow pop from Mr. Jewett, but he knows I was coming to your class, and I, you know, gotta have my fingers not sticky from a blow pop." So, yeah.
I heard a story just, again, you know, as I've been collecting them, talking to people about him playing basketball at the Y, and not too long before he passed away. And there was a younger man playing who I guess got really angry and, you know, said some things that were kind of inappropriate about another player. And Coleman just took him aside and said, "You know what, I know you're really angry and I'm sorry that happened, but there are people here for whom you have to be a role model. And I know you're looking at me, an older guy, and a bunch of older guys, but there are people younger than you. So keep in mind that you have to be a role model." Now, I'm pretty sure he didn't have a blow pop in his pocket on the basketball court. But if
But
he
you
had,
had
he
that guy
would've
stop
given
and
it to
think
him.
about it, right?
But he was also a teacher in that way to people.
And so positive, yeah.
Yeah.
You saw a teachable moment there.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
good.
He just was always using his creativity too. And I don't just mean his artistic creativity, like he just had creative ideas, like who thinks of this stuff? Like, well, I don't know if you would consider this a creative idea, but he, on a number of occasions, would let kids shave him bald. Like,
What?
and he'd show up completely shaven, his head, and he'd go, yeah, some kids wanted to shave my head. And he would just go with that. And so I think several years in a row, summertime came, and I don't know what you had to do to get to be the one to shave the principal's head, but he allowed it because he was serendipitous about things.
So what about you, Fred? Have you let anybody shave your head?
No.
You shaved somebody's head.
Yeah, well, I don't know, but they are making the hair go away.
Yeah, well, there are plenty of other jobs where that's true too. So. But that's a good story.
Yeah. The other thing that I thought was very creative, if there was somebody in the school who was down and out, like a staff person or maybe kind of grumpy or whatever, he would make it that person's day. And he would announce it on the PA, and he would say, today is so-and-so day. And I want everybody to stop by and say hello to her, wish her a good day, give her a blow pop. And then he'd have signs up all over, today we're celebrating so-and-so day. And he would just make it a lighthearted, fun thing, and could turn things around for somebody, really.
One, again, another story I've heard is when some students had done something that was really pretty inappropriate, and so he assigned them kind of community service within the school, which was to work with the janitors. Did you tell me this story, Fred?
No, but I've heard
But
of
to work and clean up work with the janitorial staff, the maintenance staff, and that one of the kids came to him later on and said, I really learned a lot from that, because I worked with those guys and I was talking to them, and I was seeing what their job is about, and I just, I'm a better person for it, kind of thing. But it was also part of the story that this kid then knew all these maintenance people as they came through, and he kind of broke down the barriers between we, the students, and the people who come in after school and clean things up.
One thing that was really special about Coleman was his history he knew of Ann Arbor and the African American community in Ann Arbor, and he spoke at our Martin Luther King Assembly at Tappan before. And there are stories that he told about like Klein's department store and Goodyear's department store that used to be on Main Street that I've never forgotten. In fact, I use them when I talk to my students. I use some of Coleman's stories about how we always think of Jim Crow laws as being down south, but there were things that were happening here in Ann Arbor that that he saw change, and he talked about what it was like when he was a kid, and how things have changed, and it was very moving to think of him going through some of the things that he did as a young African American boy growing up in Ann Arbor.
Yeah.
And so there were very valuable stories that I'm sad that I can't hear more of that he had of early Ann Arbor, or the early 1900s, and how things used to be.
Yeah, hearing it directly from somebody is
Right. He
quite
experienced those things in Ann Arbor, Michigan,
Yeah.
which you think of as being,
Well, and I think, as we
liberal
all know,
haven.
his family settled here in the 1850s, and his grandfather, George Jewett, was the first African
at
American
U of M, yeah.
player on the U of M football team.
That's right.
And so there is a long history of, the family here and a middle class, family doing well, going to college and so forth. And yet it's true that those experiences weren't just below the Mason-Dixon line.
Right, and those things didn't make him bitter, but he was happy to share them, and he found it valuable to share with kids and with teachers and everybody. One other thing I wanted to mention was his van.
Oh, yeah.
The-
Tell us about that.
His van, you couldn't help but see that and smile. It's all painted with all those Looney Tune characters, and
Yeah.
and he made himself so approachable, not just to kids, but adults. I mean, he's just so approachable about anything, and he also really understood the depths of some of the relationships that we had with our students. And if something happened to a student that we really cared about, he would make sure that we knew about it right away, and was very compassionate.
And be part of that
Yes.
support system
Yeah,
for that,
yeah. There were
that
some
kid.
tough things that happened that he he wasn't always laughing. There were things that happened that were really tough, but he was a rock through those times.
So Linda, going back to the labor negotiation stuff, was he actually a labor negotiator, or what was his role besides a cartoonist?
Yeah, well, he served on the teacher team as well as the administration's team, bargaining with the teachers. So he did both sides of the fence. That's why his advice to me on Saturday morning was excellent. Now, Carter, the other side will say. So because he served on both teams, and for a lot from 71 to 82, oh my God, I mean, a long time.
Yeah.
Quite a span there of time. Several superintendents, from there. So, but yeah, he actually served on both sides of the bargaining teams, both the Quad A administration team and the AAEA team. Yeah.
That's tremendous.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a man who wore many different hats in the school system and in the community. And he was playing basketball till a couple of weeks before he passed away, which I can't imagine myself moving around that fast on a basketball court at, 78 or so? And hanging out at the dairy was just part of the story. I don't know if he did that after he retired or if he was just one of the early birds at the dairy in the morning.
I think he did it before he retired.
Yeah, while he was working, really early.
There used to be like a big community lottery tickets. We'd all chip in. We never won anything.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just him that bought them, but it was it was fun because we would buy everybody chip in and buy lottery tickets.
Well, it is certainly our hope that we get this memorial not off the ground, but actually in the ground fairly soon. We have moved in the process to selecting an artist to execute the chairs or whatever you want to. My husband said, when I use that word, it sounded like I was going to shoot them or blow them. You know what I mean. As soon as we have raised the money for the chairs, which is a total of $45,000 with the chairs and then a little bit more for site preparation, having the artist selected, we will go immediately into writing the contract and getting the chairs underway. And we're now at about $30,000, and we have a couple of grant requests into people. And I think one of the things we hope to do in the next 10 days or so with my sidekicks, Janet Calloway and Noel Winkler, is to get the group back together that initially talked about this memorial and sort of what's the next level of strategy on raising the last few dollars. But I will say that on Sunday, one of the things that was really heartwarming, there were people who came up and said to me, I made a donation, but when we're this close, I know I can give more and push the number up. So we're going to get there.
Oh, yeah.
It's just taken a little longer than we wanted, but we're going to get there. So as we're kind of winding down, and you think about the conversation we've had, have you got one more story or one more thought that...
I had one that was shared with me, and I know that he knew a gentleman named John Woods, or Woods is another Ann Arbor name. And the family, Coleman Jewett's family and Woods family were very close. I know that there was one child that wrote a note, and he's now an adult, that left it at the farmer's market on Sunday that said he was about to get into a fight, and it was off-site. And then Coleman heard about it somehow and ended up off-site where the fight was supposed to take place, and he said he was so glad he did because he was such an advocate to make things better.
Yeah.
And the kids felt that he really cared.
Well, that's a great way to end it. And as people are listening to this, Keep in mind that you can make a contribution to the Coleman Jewett Memorial through the Ann Arbor Area Community Foundation at 303 North Main Street. We also have a Facebook page called the Jewett Memorial, and you can keep up with the latest stories and where we are in our goal and everything. So join us